Hello everybody, welcome to Weather on Earth 25 for this prediction video, which covers February and March 2022. Here we're going to look at the natural disaster forecast for the world, made by me, your host, Fire Rat, using astrology and numerology to determine which dates of the month could have higher risk for natural disasters, and even try to understand some of the patterns that you will see in the next several minutes and understand what these patterns could mean as far as not only when these disasters could strike, but also what these disasters could be, possibly ranging from weather events to earth events like earthquakes and even volcanic eruptions. Before we go ahead and look at February and March, I'd like to take a quick step back and see how the last few weeks have behaved now that we're in the new year. And 2022 has actually gotten off to a pretty interesting start. It turns out January was actually fairly active for the month, and with one day in particular that brought a very significant event to the world. It was January 15th, and that day brought a major volcanic eruption in the Pacific Ocean, specifically near the island of Tonga, that has become the biggest eruption the world has seen in several decades, at least since 1991, with the powerful blast being heard hundreds of miles away, probably something that hasn't even happened since the 1800s. So far, not many people have passed away from this event, thankfully, but the eruption did produce a devastating tsunami that caused heavy material destruction in the island of Tonga and nearby locations, and also a far-reaching, smaller tsunami that affected parts of Japan, Peru, and even California. This event basically took the world by surprise, and goes to show that a month that featured several sudden event favoring dates actually delivered a sudden natural disaster of this nature. Now, looking forward again now to February and March, as a quick preview, I will tell you that February does have a lot of sudden event dates approaching, whereas March looks more primed for several days long weather events or a disaster that takes several days to manifest. So they're both very different months, but could likely continue the active streak that we've seen so far. Alright guys, so that's it for this introduction. Let's go ahead and take a look and see how these months are looking. Let's begin with February. This is how it's looking. Alrighty folks, so let's take a look now at February 2022. This that you see right in front of you is a chart that I've made for the month, looking at the indicators that I use, which is numerology, Chinese astrology, and the Western zodiac. This is the astrology and numerology used to see whether the dates have a risk for disaster or not. That gray line that stretches from the 6, which you see on the left-hand side, there's that level scale from 0 all the way to 11, where level 6 has low. That indicates the beginning of what we can consider a risk date. And the risk only increases from 6 onwards upwards. The yellow-orange line in this graph is the sum of all the other lines below. There in the green and in the blue you have the indicators for numerology and Chinese astrology. And the yellow-orange is the sum of all that. So, out of the indicators, numerology and Chinese astrology are the really important ones out of this. The Western zodiac just adds a little bit to this, but not as much as these other two. So, we can actually see here that numerology in particular is what contributed a lot to these high risk dates on this chart, because you can see there's some wild swings from February 1st being above 8, dropping to below 6 on the 2nd, only to go way up to 9 on the 3rd, then drops all the way down on the 4th, only to go way back up to 9.5 on the 5th, and so on. Those really rapid rises in the peaks mostly correspond to those wild swings that you see in the green line below, in the bottom part of the chart. That green line also doing those wild swings up and down, that represents the numerology. So just like I've done in other videos, I would like to give a little bit more idea, a little bit more insight into how I try to figure out and decipher the patterns and the mystery behind all these esoteric methods of numerology in this case. So I want to show you what in particular is leading me to think February is looking this way. And now take a look at this. This right here that I'm going to show you right now is a numerology graph. Well, not graph, but like another type of chart that I've made for something in numerology that I've been keeping track of for several years, which is actually something we can call the 1125 phenomenon. Meaning dates that have a very strong presence of the number 11 or the number 25 or both of these numbers in the numerology chart. And this is a chart for February 2022 looking for these numbers. This is how it looks. It's a lot to take into. I'm not going to really explain too much out of this, so if you want, you could just pause the video and analyze it yourself. I got a couple, notes here and there in the legend down below. But basically, I just wanted to give you an idea of how this corresponds to that other graph that you were seeing just by looking at the very first dates of the month. You see how the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th all have red, basically, for those dates, which is, it really means that they have a really strong presence of these numbers. And then there's also other colors that indicate varying levels within that numerology, but those red dates are the ones that I really got my eye on. And also the yellow one as well, which is, fairly strong as well for the presence of these numbers. So, there's other phenomenons in numerology that also exist, but this one in particular is one of the most significant, and is actually the main one behind why February is looking like this again, with these crazy swings. It's 1125 numerology that's proving very influential, if you will, with this month. In fact, January was also one of those months that were heavily influenced by 1125 numerology. The 15th was actually an 11 type date. It was dominated by the number 11. Whereas the 25 could be found in the month of January, added to the whole year. It's a complicated process, but there's the pattern there, and I just wanted to share that with you guys. So that's one of the numerology tools that I use to analyze. And that's the one that's mainly affected February here. So now that I've shown you this, we're going to go ahead and put all these lines and stuff, and we're going to actually show you a calendar for February. This is now how the month is looking. And just imagine that graph that you were looking at with all those, different levels of risk now being visually planted onto this map. So here you can see the really strong risk dates of the 1st, 3rd, and 5th of February, followed by those lower risk days from the 8th to the 10th. And then again, that really high risk day of the 12th, the 14th as well as there, and then, so on throughout the month. And then we get to late February, which also has several powerful dates. Once we put the dates in the calendar like this, it actually helps us see if there's any pattern to these dates. Are these dates by themselves? Or are these dates actually in a group? That also helps us see what kind of events could happen for certain dates. Like I'll tell you right off the bat, that 1st, 3rd, and 5th of February, they're really there by themselves. That light blue color you see there on the 2nd, 4th, and 6th is just a precautionary thing where, you may want to give a couple hours of grace period, in between those big risk days in case, the event happens just a few hours before the 3rd of the month or just a few hours after the 5th of the month. World time zones causes this. But in reality, the 1st, 3rd, and 5th of February are very powerful single risk days, which usually translate to them being high risk days for sudden natural disasters. We're talking about earthquakes, we're talking about volcanic eruptions, tsunamis even. These kind of disasters happen during dates like this. Also tornadoes. In the weather world, tornadoes are some of the most sudden weather disasters, and these can also happen on these kind of dates. So early February is actually looking very, very active. And then we have the 8th through the 10th now, where we can say this is a 3-day risk period, which is of lower intensity, and it's 3 days. So this could possibly mean something else. I wouldn't be really worried about an earthquake or something like that here. It's probably more along the lines of a major severe weather event or a major winter storm. But since the risk is not really that high, maybe the impacts won't be either. So probably moderate would be a better word for that. A moderate weather event is likely from the 8th to the 10th. Now the 12th through the 15th is a group period. It's 4 days long. But going from virtually no risk on the 11th to that crazy risk date on the 12th also indicates a sudden change. And whenever you see a sudden change, you got to think earthquake. You got to think sudden natural disaster. Followed by 3 more risk days, of which the 14th is also favorable for something strong. So this period might actually favor both an earthquake, most likely on the 12th, or a major volcanic eruption on the 12th, and then probably major weather event, probably severe weather, from the 13th to the 15th. That's one interpretation. After that, we have some more risk dates from the 17th through the 19th. And that one there is 3 days long with a central date of the 18th, which is level 8. Those there also favor weather because it's 3 days long. It's a potential weather event that'll be 3 days long, like severe weather or maybe even a winter storm. But I also wouldn't rule out a major earthquake on the 18th of February just because of the intensity. Earthquakes also like to happen on fairly intense risk dates. It's just the way that these patterns have worked, that I've seen them work. So that's how you gotta keep in mind. After that, we got the 21st, which is by itself, and it's a very powerful date. The 20th and the 22nd are just in blue just as a precaution, but in reality, it's the 21st we're looking at. This date is very comparable to, let's say, the 5th of February. It's very similar to the 3rd as well. So a sudden event like an earthquake or a major volcanic eruption, it's also possible on the 21st. There's just a lot of these weird dates in February. And largely due because of the 1125 phenomenon coinciding with unfavorable Chinese astrology as well for those particular days. After that day, on the 23rd through the 25th, you can see it's just a bunch of red and some orange. And that 23rd is actually a very high risk day as well. It's actually a 10. So it's even higher than 9. And with these 3 days back to back, even though the other 2 days are a little lower than that level 10, since they're all conjoined, we actually got to look at the highest risk level of those days and apply it to the whole period. The 23rd is not by itself. Here it's in a group of 2, a group of 3. So there's a very high risk for a natural disaster of major significance between the 23rd and the 25th of February. And here it's a very big wild card. It could basically be just about anything that can go wrong in the month of February could happen during those days. It could be a major winter storm. It could be a major tornado event. It could be a powerful cyclone in the southern Pacific Ocean. It could even be a major earthquake happening during that 3-day period, either on the 23rd itself or maybe on the 25th. There's just a lot of potential around that time. Some of these dates are easier to make a prediction than others, but doggone, late February really is looking powerful. And eerily enough, after the 25th, the risk just seems to fall right off. So that 25th of February is also looking pretty suspicious to me. A rapid downswing from the 25th into the 26th is very similar to what happens from the 11th through the 12th. the same thing happens from the 22nd to the 23rd. A rapid rise and decline in risk. Big change, in other words. And big change, sudden change, because sometimes translate to sudden natural disaster. So, ladies and gentlemen, this month right here, to me, is a classic example of a month that is very prone to sudden natural disasters, more than anything else. It looks like a really big earthquake month, probably a big volcano eruption month, maybe even a tsunami resulting from one of these events. February 2022 is about as incredibly powerful a February that I've ever seen doing this. This is some hot stuff right here, guys. And I would advise a lot of caution during this month. And yep, I'm at 12 minutes already talking about February. It's time to give March some attention, guys. But please keep February in your mind, because now we're about to look at March. And alright, let's do this. Let's go to March. Alright, guys, so let's take a look at March now. After that ramble that I did on about February, it's time to show March some attention. And this is the chart for March 2022, the natural disaster risk, showing you the indicators again of numerology, Chinese astrology, and the Western zodiac, all combined and producing that yellow-orange line that you see there. And right off the bat, on this, if you haven't noticed it, I can tell you right away that March 2022 is a whole other ball game than February. This is another very high-risk month overall, but the events that we might have in March are likely to be very different than the ones in February. Whereas February had a bunch of crazy swings from high, level risk dates down to virtually no risk the day after, only to rise back up again. Crazy up and downs, leading to a bunch of single risk dates of high importance. The month of March seems to have more prolonged risk periods, and before I go ahead and put all these, squiggled lines into an actual calendar to make it better to look at, I can tell you right off the bat that, there's some pretty long risk periods from between March 4th and the March 9th, March 11th and March 17th, as well as virtually March 20th all the way to the March 27th. Those are like some of the takeaways I can tell you about March. So, before I go any further, let's go ahead and, make a mental image of this chart. And I'm going to translate it now to the calendar, like I did for February. Here we go. So this right here is the calendar for March with the colors, showing you all the risk dates and the power that we have on each date. And as you can see, there's a lot of high risk days as well in March. So this month is also no slouch, and likely to be a very busy month. But it is also a month full of back-to-back risk dates. So the chance for sudden natural disasters is not as high as it was in February. That's the good thing that I see here. For example, let's start off with March 1st and 2nd. Those two dates, they're not single risk dates. It's actually a group of 2 days. So I could be predicting here that we could see a potential 2-day weather event. Probably a significant severe weather event. Wouldn't I be surprised to see that, for example? Although there's a bit of change from the 2nd into the 3rd. And then from the 3rd into the 4th. Where the 2nd and 4th are fairly strong risk dates. So I would not rule out an earthquake of significance on March 2nd or March the 4th. But after March 4th, we got the 5th and 6th and level 8. In the level 8s, basically. So that's the high-risk category. Followed by the 7th in green, the 8th in yellow, and the 9th in light green. Here, we're looking at a longer period. I mean, the 4th to the 8th, that's 5 days. No, actually to the 9th. That's 4th through the 9th. That's 6 days of risk period back to back. So here we're probably looking at something more longer duration. So my first thought is severe weather. It's March. It's the beginning of spring in some parts of the world. We could be talking about severe weather and flooding events happening from the 4th all the way to the 9th. With the probability being significant because we do have strong risk dates on the 5th and 6th. So those level 8 dates could give that period a pretty strong risk for having this event overall. Because, the whole period will take on the percentage risk of the 5th and 6th of March, which is level 8, which is roughly about 30 to 35% chance of actually having a natural disaster, of which 20 to 25% is the chances of being severe. That's more or less how it works. Then there's a break on the 10th, but it's light blue because right after that on the 11th we go back to risk date, and these light blue dates are also used to bridge the small gap there is between two really long risk periods, if these risk periods contain powerful enough risk dates, which would be about level 7.5, which both of these are higher than that. March 11th now, all the way through March 17th, is another slew of back-to-back risk dates, which peaks on the 15th at a very high risk level there. Level 9 and above, basically, on the 15th. So this is where it's starting to get pretty dicey. This whole risk period here is fair game for major long-duration disasters that would happen in the month of March, which include South Pacific cyclones of important intensity, major flooding, and severe weather outbreaks. This long enough period could actually favor 2 severe weather outbreaks. We could also see a highly intense and dangerous cyclone in the South Pacific Ocean that could strike land. It's not out of the question. This is the kind of stuff that I think of when I see dates like this back to back. As far as earthquakes or sudden natural disasters, while they would be secondary in a period like this, the most likely dates would be the 11th, the 15th, and the 17th for such an event. After the 17th, the risk drops off for a couple days, but then it rises again on the 20th. And the 20th, if you remember, that was a date that went up way up to like level 10. So here is probably one of the few exceptions in March where I can tell you this date could favor a major earthquake over many other things, because of a sudden increase and change from the 19th into the 20th. So there's a pretty strong chance for something like that to happen on March 20th, like a major earthquake. But then this risk could transform into a longer duration weather event lasting until the 21st and the 22nd. As you can see there, those are still risk dates. So March 20th through March 22nd could also favor a major weather disaster, most likely coming from a severe weather outbreak and tornadoes, or once again, a powerful Pacific cyclone in the southern hemisphere. After that, the 23rd is a quick pause, although we are bridging the gap there because it's just one single date of no risk sandwiched between 2 really powerful periods. So the risk could easily carry over to the 23rd, but, just as a precaution, we're putting that there in light blue. But the 24th is a very similar situation to March 20th. It's yet again another high level 10 risk date following a date that was below level 6. So once again, the major increase, in change between the 23rd into the 24th could also lead to another major sudden natural disaster. So once again, this could be a powerful earthquake or something like that type of disaster date. But then it will meld into a 4-day risk period, which continues into the 25th, 26th, and 27th. So this could also be another weather disaster risk period. So once again, there's a high potential for a major severe weather outbreak, including tornadoes, or a powerful South Pacific cyclone from March 24th all the way to March 27th. In secondary, we could see an earthquake on the 24th and the 27th of major importance. After that, 2 days of, disaster-free risk. And then we got green dates on the 30th and 31st. Back-to-back 2 days. This could be a short-duration weather event, unless this, risk continues into April. Not a big risk for disasters in terms of earthquakes and stuff like that. So I would just say a weather event is likely during those last 2 days of March, probably being severe weather in the most likely scenario. So yeah, guys, that's how March is looking on the calendar. A lot to talk about, just like February, but Unlike February, which was a clear-cut case of significant sudden natural disasters happening within that month, this time in March, we're looking at a month that is actually more geared towards longer duration events. Yeah, there's a couple exceptions here that favor sudden disasters, including earthquakes, especially like March 20th and March 24th. But overall, most of the other risk days in March are more oriented towards potential severe weather, tornadoes, flooding, and South Pacific cyclones, because it just so happens that the month of March is the peak of South Pacific cyclone season. And that's one thing that you have to keep in mind when thinking about what kind of weather disaster could happen in a certain month. The month of March is well known for cyclones in the South Pacific, and it's also well known for severe weather in North America, especially in parts of Europe, as well as flooding. A lot of spring storms start happening in March, so we talk about flooding and severe weather going hand in hand. Alright, my friends, so yep, that's the calendar for March. That's how it's looking. Keep the calendar from February as well in mind, because now we're going to take this that I've shown you guys so far, taking into account the indicators and which days are looking riskiest on the calendar, thanks to the numerology and the Chinese astrology and all those aspects put together. Now that you see where I'm coming from as far as which dates on the calendar could be more favorable for sudden natural disasters and which days are more favorable for longer duration natural disasters, you'll understand how come I make these predictions the way I'm doing them now. Hopefully. So in the next few minutes now, you're going to see my actual written predictions for February and March. Trying my best here to put all this together and try to make the forecast, which is looking at the most likely scenarios and second most likely scenarios and the third more likely scenarios for each month, and also highlighting which dates are actually at bigger risk of having these events. After that, you'll see just a rundown of the different risk periods within these months and the kind of percentages associated with them for those of you who are interested in that kind of stuff. The numeric aspect of risk calculation for these states and everything. It's going to be there. And of course, at the end, towards the end of the video, please watch all the way to the end, because you will see the maps and the graphics that I make highlighting the world areas that are most likely to have each type of natural disaster scenario. So the locations more likely to have earthquakes, or the locations more likely to have tornadoes, or the cyclones, they'll be there, as well as the dates. The dates will be highlighted on those maps, so you will see exactly which parts of the world could be impacted on which particular dates for each type of disaster event possibility. Meaning you'll see which days are the likeliest earthquake days and which parts of the world are probably at highest risk, or which dates are riskier for tornadoes and severe weather and which parts of the world are at highest risk. That kind of thing. That's the main goal I have here. I want to contribute to that, because I feel there's not a lot of videos in anywhere that you can find in YouTube or anywhere else using this alternative method for making predictions like this into the far future. Because that's what we're doing here. We're looking well ahead in time, not just a couple days, but we're going all the way to the end of March. And yeah, my friends, so brace yourselves. Here begins the second part of this video, the actual forecast in written format. I hope you like the visuals that you're going to see and find it useful. Thanks so much. Here we go. Alright, my friends, so that was the predictions for February and March 2022. I hope you liked the way that they were presented and that we found them useful. As you can see, February is looking like a pretty powerful sudden natural disaster month. And March is looking like another powerful month, but probably more for longer duration weather events. So, all I can say is keep an eye on those earthquake locations, just in case, February decides to be a very active month in that regard. And beware of the weather when March comes around, in case we do see a lot of severe weather, flooding, and even tropical cyclones in some parts of the world. That month could also be pretty active. So that's basically it, my friends. I plan to make another video sometime later for April and May. Please be safe out there. And like they say, let's hope for the best, but also prepare for the worst, in case some of these things actually do happen. But until then, guys, please take care and have a good couple months ahead. Goodbye.